the biggest thing for me, especially kind of as a scientist, is trying to solve problems that have a high impact.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Founders in LA podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Cole, and this is an opportunity to shine the spotlight through a product lens on some of the exceptional founders we have as part of the LA community in an unedited, one-take organic conversation. With us in the studio today is Patricia McNeil. Thanks so much for coming down, Patricia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
This is great. I'm excited, and she's a fellow Bruin. We need to get a lot of Bruins in the house tonight. But first, a word from our sponsors. Founders in LA is brought to you by Nearshore. Nearshore is a trailblazer in nearshore outsourcing and staff augmentation. With over 15 years of experience offering exceptional Latin American software, development, data, product, and design talent for U.S. projects, Nearshore has revolutionized the way companies scale their teams. They stand apart with 50% female leadership, are trusted by companies large and small, and have been helping U.S. customers grow since before nearshoring was cool. Discover how Nearshore can power your tech goals and help you stay lean while scaling fast. Learn more at www.nearshore.com. That's www.nearsure.com. We're also brought to you by United Club. United Club is a co-working space that sets itself apart. With locations in El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, and Hermosa, United is where creativity flourishes. Unlike traditional offices, they provide an inspiring environment where ideas can thrive and businesses can grow. With United, there's no hidden fees, flexible terms, options for dedicated offices, and unlimited access to conference rooms, a photo studio, this podcast studio, plus standard and 3D printers, and 24/7 access at any of their locations. They're local champions who support neighborhood businesses, open their event spaces to nonprofits, and celebrate art, music, and culture. Join United Club and experience co-working like never before. Learn more at www.united.club. Our guest today is Patricia McNeil. She's the CEO and co-founder of Westwood Aerogel. Patricia, could you just give us a 30-second description of Westwood Aerogel?
Yeah, so Westwood Aerogel is basically an advanced manufacturing company, and we make the lightest, most insulating material on Earth. But that was previously limited to very niche application spaces. And what we do that's quite unique is we tackle the problem from the manufacturing perspective. So we make this insulation material mass producible. And because of that, we can bring it to new product spaces, such as electric vehicle battery pack protection.
Wow. All right. So, and I forgot to mention, Patricia is fresh off the stage from TechStars, where she participated in the space program. Is the application... What are some of the applications for this aerogel? And you've created the lightest and most insulating material. Where are places that people might see it in the near future?
So like you mentioned, we did come from recently from the TechStars aerospace community. And one of the big application spaces for aerogel material is actually in the aerospace industry. So one of our target audiences would be like off world vehicles, like for example, a lunar rover, especially for extreme temperature swings that happen in those environments. So what you want to do is basically protect temperature sensitive electronics as well as battery packs in those types of settings.
That's amazing, because you said off-world, and I was like, oh, off-road. No, literally off-world. So like Mars rovers and anything else we send out to outer space.
And actually, the Mars rover, I think, is one of the main like previous applications for aerogel material. Like that's kind of since it's so light and so insulating, it was like a choice material for those types of settings.
Which makes 100% sense, right? So then, in terms of lightness, we have to be able to get it out there, so every ounce probably matters, right? And then the extreme temperatures that you'll be facing over there, you know better than me, but I believe it's like a couple hundred degrees difference between sun and darkness, right?
Yeah. So especially because when you don't have a lot of atmosphere, then the like solar radiation component just plays such a big role in heating. And if you're not in the sun, then you're basically in extremely cold environments.
And I guess digging into the weeds a little bit, how are you manufacturing this in a way that's more? Is it both lighter and more insulating, or is it kind of a twofer? Or how did you get to a place where you're doing that?
So actually, the material itself, like aerogel materials itself, it's more than 90% porosity. So it's extremely, extremely light, and that's because it's mostly made of air. But what we're doing that's different in the manufacturing process is we're making it cheaper to produce this material. So when you make the material, basically, when you first synthesize it, it's filled with liquid, and you need to extract all of that liquid in order to get the insulation property. But the previous way of doing that is basically having like this cylindrical autoclave situation, and it is stupid hard to scale that. So you're trying to make like this pressure chamber bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's just not something that's going to work on like a mass market setting.
Right. And so then how does Westwood Aerogel fit into find itself in the picture?
Yeah. So what we do is we can get insulation material that has the same quality, so the same porosity, and we can do that with it's basically like an ambient pressure, ambient temperature process. You can kind of imagine like a dehumidification process where we just kind of very gently evaporate all of the pore fluid out of the material, if that makes sense.
I'm trying my best to follow along, which is, going back to the Bruin, that she just also got her PhD in this area from UCLA. So you guys have created a way to. So previously, the ways to create aerogel required some kind of compression chamber that would have to scale at least itself in size. So if you want to do a lot of it, you'd be thinking like instead of something maybe I imagine like the size of maybe a propane tank to start, and you're looking at like a room sized chamber, which would, probably exponentially increase the cost.
Yeah, yeah. So especially when you're considering the safety considerations, like making a really large pressure chamber of that size and making a lot of them. Don't absolutely quote me on this, but as I understand it, like for the traditional manufacturing, if you save 15 minutes in that pressure chamber for the processing, you'd be saving like $1 million per year per unit, which is massive.
Yeah, and you guys have found a way to.
Just
Of
completely ignore that process. So it's basically it's very similar actually to paper drying. So we have like really flat insulation panels, and we basically just kind of can gently evaporate it in the way that you would get water out of paper.
How did you find yourself in this world? I mean, you probably didn't grow up thinking like, "Hey, I can find a better aerogel out there or a better process for creating it." How did you find yourself, in the founder seat in this arena?
So actually, my journey kind of starts back in an academic setting. So I went to school at UCLA, and I recently got my PhD. And basically, this aerogel project started out as a way to make transparent insulation. I was funded under a Department of Energy grant that was looking to make insulation for double pane window applications. But what I ended up working on was a way to make this aerogel material much more easily, because you want to be able to make like really big sheets of this material even for a window application. So like I worked on a way to try and reach that particular goal. And then by the time I was done with my PhD, I was thinking like I didn't really want my research to just kind of fade away. So I was trying to think of a way that how can we use this aerogel material in a way that has a very high impact. And then as I started kind of exploring this and kind of exploring entrepreneurship, I ended up pivoting very quickly. So it's like windows aren't necessarily the highest impact place that I can use this aerogel material. So I ended up kind of transitioning that into a new application space that's really focusing on the lightness and the insulation property rather than the transparency with the insulation properties.
Wow. So you started actually in, so many puns I try to avoid here, but you're much more grounded here when you were using the an application to double paned windows, like literally windows that would be in a house or in some sort of in some sort of building. So you're trying to like create a more efficient way to conserve energy here on Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and then you were looking for more impact, identifying that, hey, I set out to create this transparent, super insulating material. And I did that, but the most interesting part of it isn't the transparency. The most interesting part is the lightness and the ability to insulate. And there's bigger challenges out there that I can apply this to, including, space and I guess, as you mentioned, electric batteries.
Yeah. So, like, the biggest thing for me, especially kind of as a scientist, is trying to solve problems that have a high impact. And like sustainability and green technologies is something that I find extremely interesting. So, just kind of like building off of that, we're trying to think of how can I use this material in a way that is going to have the biggest impact for my effort, kind of thing. So, this is really applicable for any space where you want to improve the energy efficiency of your product. So you can think also about like building infrastructure, building envelope. But when you're thinking about those kinds of things, you're like kind of competing with the current state of the art. And like when people think about building insulation, they're like, I just want to go to Home Depot and buy it. But for a like lab level of technology, I can't really drive down the cost that quickly. So I also have to think about where am I going to get high impact and have like early entry markets. So that's kind of where the aerospace component of it comes in, because aerospace is traditionally a space where you can have a very high impact and like very next level technology and actually get it into an early market.
Wow. And so then, as you're making this pivot, and I guess it may have been a more direct route when you're in the window pane like arena, right? Because the Department of Energy is already kind of paying you for that. There's
Mhm.
probably the major players are like, oh yeah, I'd really like to have a transparent, really really light and very insulating material. But then you switch to space. Like, how do you go about trying to identify who could potentially be your early customers?
Hmm. I mean, it's kind of like a general kind of like problem solving perspective. So it's like when you think of like a puzzle and you're trying to think of what piece fits into what particular puzzle, sometimes it's not the most direct, most obvious answer. You just got to kind of think about what properties your product is actually providing and whose problems that's actually going to help solve. So I was like, historically, aerogels have a space in the aerospace industry. So it's kind of like going back to where historically they fit. And especially because the aerospace economy is really taking off in a way that it hasn't before, especially with more private aerospace companies. So you can think about, I mentioned like lunar rovers, or you can also think about Martian vehicles or even like cube satellites. There are definitely a lot more companies now than there used to be. And temperature control on those electronics is something that's really interesting and something that they've basically kind of started to ask for.
So when you're identifying, okay, these are a couple places I might be able to fit in. Um, how are you reaching out? How are you finding access to these people to be able to even tell them about, hey, I have a brand new form of aerogel that you guys will blow your minds?
Yeah. So at the moment, most of my connections have been very kind of like an organic networking setting. So, like I mentioned, or like you mentioned, I think earlier, I recently came out of a Techstars accelerator. So there's the opportunity there for having like demo days, networking events, just like small gatherings where you have pitch sessions. And actually, a lot of my customers, especially within the aerospace industry, are kind of other startups who are on this journey with me. So it's like I connect with a founder who's working on a component of a cube satellite, and then they kind of express to me, "Oh, this temperature control is something that's really interesting to us," and it's like typically a stupid amount of the cost for figuring out how this satellite's going to function, and um, yeah. So there's just kind of like that. organic connection aspect of it, especially for the early customers, because it's like you want to build a relationship with the people that you're helping to support.
Yeah, and so these relationships, it sounds like they are being formed one through an accelerated program, this specifically here at Techstars Aerospace, where they're helping companies like yours connect directly with mentors and potential investors who are in that area. And then it sounds like it's also you're connecting with other founders in this area with you, because your particular product is non-competitive. It's actually beneficial to a lot of these other folks who are trying to figure out, how do I put this thing in space? How do I account for my own challenges with temperatures? And you're able to come in with a solution that they love, that they want to hear about, that's cheaper and better.
Yeah. So when I try and think about, even when I try and think about like other aerogel companies, I'm trying to focus on where I can have the highest impact. And that's not necessarily always in a competitive space. It's often in a much more collaborative space. And it's just kind of like trying to work with people and really build out pilots that are going to demonstrate my product functioning at its best as well as their product functioning at its best.
That's almost, it's not even, there's a term called competition, but it's not even that. You're just trying, you win if they win. I mean,
Mm-hmm,
in this
mm-hmm.
scenario, like if you give them a cheaper, light, not even just, I guess cheaper is part of it, a lighter and better product that allows them to send that into space as less of a burden on whoever is, propelling the rockets that are sending it up there. That's a win for everyone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You mentioned electronic vehicle batteries. Like
Mm.
what are the next steps? So we just closed out the Techstars, I think maybe like a week or two ago. This is an
Mm-hmm.
exciting time. So what does the next month look like for Westwood Aerogel?
So for this specific month, there's a couple of Department of Energy concept papers that are going to be due. So part of my funding strategy is utilizing like grant proposals, SBIR, or Small Business Research Innovation grant proposals. And basically, I'm gonna be spending quite a bit of time just kind of like fleshing out those grant proposals and you know preparing to submit them. Another aspect of what the next few months look like is really trying to scale up some of my production. So I'm actually making a physical product, which has a unique challenge that I can only offer a customer as much as I have. So some of my, not quite a bit of my time is going to be spent actually in the lab, really trying to improve automation of my production and also scale up some of the production. So then when I engage with the customer and we agree to a pilot test, I can actually produce enough of this material to fully insulate the component that they're interested in.
How much of the material is typically needed by one of these early folks? Because we're talking about, it must not be in large quantities, at least when you're talking about
Mm.
I don't know, lunar modules,
Mhm.
or Mars rovers that themselves. I guess Mars rovers can be up to the size of an SUV, but I imagine some of the things that you're trying to protect probably don't cover the entirety of the whole rover.
Yeah, yeah. So a big part that we're really trying to focus in on, especially because we think that it's going to have like larger growth for the company later on, is protecting the battery component. So we're really trying to focus on like a smaller, maybe more on the cube satellite setting, where it's a smaller payload and you can really just insulate that cube sized area. So you're thinking about like square feet of insulation rather than, hundreds of square feet of insulation.
And how long does it take to create a square feet of
Oh no.
insulation?
So right now, a square foot would take at least about 24 hours because some of that is embedded in the processing aspect of it. But as we start to scale, a lot of why it takes so long is because one particular step is kind of like limited. It's a rate limiting step. So it's like that part of it takes at least a majority of the time, more than 50% of the time. but that part can be done in a batch setting. So you can imagine, instead of having a very small chamber where I'm doing the drying process, I just have a larger chamber and I'm feeding more samples into that larger chamber. So in that way, I end up scaling up production by having a larger overall batch. And ideally, we're going to get the production fast enough where it's in a continuous line setting. But for early stage scaling, it's just kind of increasing the batch size and increasing the number of aerogel panels that I can produce every day.
And I imagine, you're saying it takes 24 hours to create the square foot, but many of these projects, are months or years of planning ahead of time. So
Mm.
uh, it seems from the outside, it seems like that's a manageable amount of time. You're kind of wincing when you say it, but I feel like it's more of the pain of someone who's actually doing it themselves, rather than like the business need or how quickly you could actually produce it to meet the business need.
Yeah, I'm definitely wincing because right now I'm mainly the person who's in the lab. So that means that's like a lot of manual labor on my end.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like I'm mixing chemicals, I'm doing solvent exchanges, I'm setting up the drying experiment, and it's just a lot of hands-on. Um, I guess labor is the right word, but it's a lot of hands-on work, and that's something we definitely would need to be able to speed up. So then if I'm like, for example, if I'm trying to tackle 2 or 3 customers at once, I don't want to be spending 24 hours a day just kind of like doing all this stuff and then having to take my Zoom meetings in between like lab stuff. So it's just kind of, it's slow for me.
Oh,
It's a
good.
lot to do.
Oh my gosh, yes, and
Yeah.
it's not easy to create a brand new substance in the world that you send to other worlds. Uh, but then, thank you so much. And then, what's the future look like? What are you guys
Mm.
looking to do next?
Yeah. So the future overall, so we definitely are going to automate a lot of those things. So it's not going to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
like entirely hands on moving forward. And there is still opportunity for some R&D growth. So I talked about speeding up the drying process. My PhD is really centered on being able to dry things from like highly porous and amorphous structures. So what I'm trying to say here is that I have a lot of ideas for how to speed up the drying process and how to really drive down the costs of production even more than have already improved it and increase the output. And there's a lot of like engineering challenges that are going to be really exciting for us to work through that. But then once we get through those engineering challenges, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for product engagement. So there, you think of an insulation material that can be applied to aerospace, that can be applied to infrastructure, that can be applied to electric vehicles, especially in cold climate conditions.
Mm.
So it's just kind of like exploring all these possibilities and balancing all the opportunities as they come my way or
Yeah,
our
no,
way, the
yeah.
company's
It
way.
sounds. And I definitely think in this world where there's going to be an increasing reliance on batteries and
Mm.
an increasingly uh, unpredictable, seems to be climate. Um, the ability to insulate both heat and cold is going to be a place where it'd be a nice place to live.
Mm. Yeah.
That's great, especially as a business. Uh, well, Grinding is back in LA. We've done it a couple of times with the Bruin references, which I do love. What's the most LA thing that's happened to you, Patricia? It could be tech related, doesn't have to be.
Yeah. I think something that seems really LA to me is kind of like how I met my co-founder. So we actually met just kind of completely at random. So it's like that very classic serendipity LA kind of vibe. So we were both at a networking event, completely unrelated to any work either of us was doing. And my co-founder was actually trying to network my professor, but the only thing he could think of to try and engage with this guy was complimenting his shoes. Granted, he had very nice shoes and he was very well dressed, but after 5 minutes of the same compliments, basically my professor was like, dude, you need to talk to someone your own age. So then he kind of like sent him over to me, and then we started chatting. And I started talking about my company. I already knew that that was the direction that I was going to go in, and then it just started to work out. which is a very like random, unique, and very LA founder story.
Yeah, it's serendipitous, and just end up. You never know where it's going to happen.
Mm.
That's fantastic. Oh, thank you again, and thank you, Patricia, for joining us. It's Patricia McNeil. She's the CEO and co-founder of Westwood Aerogel. Thanks so much for coming down.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been great. We'd like to thank our sponsors again, Nearshore and Unita. I'd like to thank you all for listening to us, and if you like what you hear, please smash that subscribe button. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time on Founders in LA.